So, Mayor and Councilmember, the item you have in front of you tonight is the establishment of the 2019 preliminary tax levy. Just a reminder of the process. I'll talk about the statutory process first. We are required by the end of September to actually establish a preliminary tax levy. Once we establish that levy, we can't go higher than it. We can go lower as we set the final levy. It's done now so that residents can get their truth and taxation statements out before our truth and taxation hearing, which is the first Monday in December. We have that public hearing to make our final budget presentation and levy recommendation, and then hear comments, and then we don't take action that night. We actually come back to the second meeting in December. Now, from a practical standpoint, the way we've always approached this is to actually wrap the preliminary tax levy into our 5-year financial forecast, so that we make sure that the decisions we're making now, know what kind of impact they have as we go into the future. So major items we talked about last year, we fully implemented the CIP program on an annual basis. That's $1 million that goes towards annual projects we'll talk about. Continued utilization of our tax levy policy. We did have the complete loss of LGA last year, but we did recoup half of that last year through our tax levy. And then we talked about sustainability of our services from a resource perspective and delivery of service levels expected by our residents. And I'll specifically talk about how we're sort of taking that first step in that this year with the addition of our code compliance division, and how that not only has an impact on providing a more reliable service to our residents, but also has a pretty significant impact on being able to take some pretty heavy weight off of areas that right now are having to address those different items. So the items that we're going to discuss for the 2019 through 23, so our CIP program, and I'll talk about the projects we have coming up over the next 5 years, our tax levy policy, again, our code compliance and community services, and how that ties into sustainability of our services. So the objectives that we have for budgeting each year, we want to support our budgeting programs that help us strengthen our mission of being the best small town in Minnesota. And hopefully after that presentation that we had last week from Decision Resources, where it's pretty clear that people now identify Chaska primarily as being a small town, that's something that even as we've continued to develop, that sense of small town has gotten stronger. So I think that's one that we have to continue to focus on. Maintaining our existing high-level quality service levels, limit tax levy growth to capture only new growth in the community, and expenditure inflation. So the two things that impact our actual cost of service, and then address any kind of new services that we have or are proposing. Fully fund the maintenance and replacement of our vehicles and equipment. Fund new programs only after existing necessary programs are funded. Try to avoid drawdowns in our city's fund reserves. Fully fund our street reconstruction program. And again, develop a long-term budget plan that's sustainable from a resource perspective. And we first put that into our objectives last year. And again, this year with Code Compliance Division, it's really sort of our first step into addressing that. So budget environmental factors, our existing property values have continued to modestly increase. In 2015, we saw 8.21%, and all the way up to last year, we saw a 5.72% increase, and right around 2% new growth within the community. So with the new growth, one of the things that I think is important to remember with that is that when we incorporate the new growth into our tax levy, it's really not impacting the other residents. It's just making sure that as new values come into the community, that they're paying their fair share for services. So, so capturing that, make sure that all new residents are paying for the services that are provided have to be increased because new growth. Again, no local government aid payments, and we continue to expect that into the future. We've continued to have stability in building permits. 2017 and 18 have been very strong. We've actually been running higher than budget for each of the years, and it's been happening not just in residential like we saw a decade ago, but it's really been a mixture of all different types of growth that have occurred in the community. Continue to see a steady increase of population. Our electric usage has continued to go up significantly, and again, we've seen a good balance of development types. So I'll circle here the overall percentage growth in market values in the community for 2018 for taxes payable next year is 5.72%. You can see that residential, the existing market change was about 4%. So the average existing home will see about a 4% increase in their market values. And the percent of new construction for 2018 for next year is 1.7% increase in market values just because of new construction. This is a distribution of where you see those values go across. The majority, 72%, is residential, but we do have a strong commercial industrial base at 14%, apartments at 13%, and the other at 1% is mainly agricultural property that just has not been developed yet. Our market values have continued to increase. We've actually averaged a 6.24% increase over the past 4 years. And you can see we're projecting 2% each year as we look through the 5-year. But if we continue to see these trends, we would expect that that's actually going to be higher than that. So we're trying to keep that relatively conservative. And so based on the market value growth that we will see for this year, which was 5.7%, that translates into a 5.6% increase in our tax capacity for next year, and that's what directly impacts what people pay in taxes. So the new construction values in the community from 2009 forward, every year we've seen some kind of new construction, even in the lean years. And again, I put this out there just to illustrate that all this new growth results in, even if we don't change our services that we provide, it results in having a higher service level that we have to provide because there's more people we have to provide that to, which makes sense of why we'd want to capture that new growth. I told Councilmember Schultz last week that I was throwing this in for him one last time, just so he wouldn't ever forget it, where we've come and where we've gone with local government aid.
I'll make sure I watch this portion of the meetings in the future.
I'm taking it out. It's never coming back again.
Unless the money does.
I'll come back.
Yeah, unless the money comes back,
I'll
then
come
we'll put
back
it in.
specifically for these meetings.
All right.
Bet you won't.
Me too.
So we did recapture half of the lost LGA last year at $128,000 through our levy, and we're recommending no change for this in 19. Building permits, you can see that for 2018, we're at about $1.3 million for building permits, which even during our peak times back during the pre-recession times, we were just over $1 million. Now keep in mind, it's 10 years later, so the values do go up. But we have seen a pretty dramatic increase from the dips that we saw during the recession period all the way up to now. And we expect that that's going to continue into the future because we can really see now what we're going to have going into the future. Population right now, you can see that our estimate going into 2019 would be about 26,600 new residents. And during this planning period, we expect that we're going to get to just over 28,000. Right now, we're anticipating that our full build out of about 35,000 is probably about 20 years out. So we have about 20 years more of development, and then really we're sort of done with development unless we focus on redevelopment projects. So electric franchise fee revenue, since the addition of both data centers and also the additions, we've seen significant additions onto existing industries in our community. Our electric usage has gone up pretty dramatically. We have 10% of that comes back from the electric fund back to our general fund as a franchise fee. And for 2019, that's going to be about $3.7 million. And again, I always like to point out with this that we have the 10% franchise fee, but our rates compared to both Excel and Minnesota Valley, including our franchise fees, are still about 8 to 9% lower than Excel or Minnesota Valley. And so we've been able to have good, reliable energy that's cheap, and at the same time be able to have a significant impact and be able to keep our taxes down. So discussion items coming up here. These are the ones I'm going to focus on. I'll talk about each one of them individually. So first of all, from an operational standpoint, tax levy policy. So basically our policy focuses on two things that have direct impact on the actual cost of service. So one is the new growth in the community. So the new growth in the community is 1.7%. And that 1.7%, adding that on, really doesn't have an impact on the rest of the residents because it's new market value that's actually in the community. So that's increased level of service because of more people in the community. And our policy goes on to say the other thing that impacts us is our actual inflationary cost increase for our cost of providing services. So about 70% of our costs are staff-related costs, so a big portion of that has to do with what kind of increases that we see in wages. What we're seeing at the national level for inflation right now is it's 2.9% or right about 3% for inflation. So we look at those two together to come up with what we recommend for our operational tax levy. So from just an operational standpoint, we would recommend a 4.7% increase. Our tax capacity, again, increased by 5.6%. So we'd actually see a decrease in our tax rate based on just the operational side of the policy. Included in that operational side is our capital improvement program. And so that's $1 million that we put per year. And these are the things, I focus a lot on 2019 because these are the things that are coming up next year. So the street overlay program, $350,000. I did put in your staff report which roads were being proposed as part of it. I don't have it in front of me now, so I can't remember. But it's in your staff report to show which roads are actually being proposed to be overlaid. Each year we put $60,000 into trail upgrades and overlay. So this year where you saw it was up on Village Road, and in that area up there was a full overlay of the trails up in that area. We have a new pedestrian bridge that needs put in on our main trail system. Those are about $70,000. We have the landscaping wall that's over behind Cooper's on the second clay hole lake over here, which is our responsibility. That's one that's actually failing at this point and needs to get replaced. And we're still finding out more on the dock too as far as what to do on that. But we have $200,000 programmed for that project. Siren number 2 replacement. This is the one just across from the middle schools up on Englewood Boulevard. That's $25,000. We have annual maintenance and a hoist replacement up at the MSB for $45,000. The Cortina Woods Playground and Trail are proposed to be the park that gets upgraded next year. And one thing that we've changed since our discussion in our work session last week is changing out and bringing Lions Park shelter improvements into 2019, primarily because of the work that we're doing with the dog park in Lions Park to really have all those improvements done together. So that's one, I know that's one we've talked about for quite some time, is getting those improvements. We'll actually have the dollars in there to do that next year.
So a question, Matt,
Yep.
is street overlay, is that different than street reconstruction?
Yes.
It is, because I think Christian Drive and them that's reconstruction, right, and not overlay? Because I see Louisa in here as overlay, but I don't see, because I knew they were coming up pretty quick here.
Yeah, those aren't ready for reconstruct yet. I think it was.
The streets, yeah, they're a mess. They're like,
Well, what you have is the seal coat.
yeah, they're
Some of the
crumbling away.
seal coat has come off. They're looking at actually dealing with that, but the road structure itself is actually in really good shape there.
For some reason, I had that in my head that Christian Drive and Parkway was on the 2019 or?
It's,
It's too new for rebuild.
and it wasn't that long ago that we did the overlay, but we had some issues with that product, and so Brian's actually looking at areas like that to, because in essence, what's happening in some of those places, it's peeling up. The
So how does
ceiling coat is-
Louisa make it and like Christian Drive doesn't make it?
The soils conditions were worse up there when the development went in, and so the roads and
Yeah.
the actual, to me, it's really a difference between the aesthetics and the actual road structure. If you get too far gone on the road structure, it requires a rebuild, where if you get it soon enough, an overlay can stop you from having to rebuild. And the advantage to the residents on that is that an overlay is free.
Right.
Rebuild is assessment.
So they are looking at that because I think I sent you pictures.
Yep.
The road is just crumbling away.
Yeah, and that's, it looks bad. It's more of an aesthetic issue than it is a structural issue, but they've had those issues pop up on other roads too.
Is
So
the,
they are looking at that.
When is Christian Drive?
I'll have to find that out, but I
Okay,
can.
because I had it in my head it was either 2019 or 2020. That I've been actually telling residents that.
It may be 2020. I'll find out and get it to you.
is the bridge for, it's going to connect to, next to Lake Grace, under the tunnel and all that, is that part of this?
That's not part of the CIP. That was actually part of the construction project up there. This is mainly rehabbing things that exist already.
Okay.
So the 120, did we change something in there?
Yep. So we had some of the athletic park improvements to get ready for the state tournament in there. We have a little bit of time. We have a little bit more time that we can do that.
We don't need to do it. I'll zip it.
Plus, I'd figure you'd say that. No, no, that's one of the things we hope to do, and I know we have had previous discussions with Alliance, is to talk about are the things that they want to do when we're going and actually doing
Those
that.
bathrooms are pretty bad, and that's such a used park that they just have to get.
One, it's more than, it's putting lipstick on a pig to go in there and try to do something to the existing. It's pretty bad shape.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
in bad shape.
Hey, don't knock it unless you tried it.
Yeah. 2020.
Thanks for moving that. I think that's important. I think that.
Well, and I think you guys made a good point that if we're doing the improvements on the dog park, it makes sense to have all those Lions Park improvements at the same time.
Agreed.
So, 2020 street overlay, I'll find out the roads. We have not identified the specific roads yet, but we have about $260,000 in, seal code of 40,000, trails, siren. The big one there is City Square Park rehab, and like I mentioned last week, this is going to depend, the timing exactly in this is going to depend on when everything happens with reconstruction over here. So it's possible that you might see this shift a year, but it's important that we put the resources in so that we make sure that when the timing's right for that, that we have the resources ready to go.
Have you been
Absolutely.
working on the rethoughts of City Square Park?
No.
That's not too far out, 2020. And if you're talking, doing some major shifting of things.
Well, that's going to be a major discussion we have to have is what do we, we won't be able to come to that conclusion in 5 minutes.
No.
Yeah. So 2021, again, street overlay, there's a little bit more that he has programmed in that year, less than the seal coat. You know, the big things that year, so the town course park rehab, we put that one in there. The town course park needs rehabbed, but one of the things I've been sharing with you guys a little bit is a master plan that we've been looking at for town course and looking at how we could potentially create some more community-wide amenities up there. So part of that is if we did that, we'd have to move the playground, and it's time for it to get rehabbed anyway. And so putting those dollars in there so that if we go forward and start looking at plans and say, yes, this is something we want to do, that we know we have the money budgeted in the CIP program to be able to go along with that. So again, this could shift depending on some of the concept plans that we've been sort of messing around with. But I wanted to make sure at least we put some dollars in there to be able to earmark that. This is where the Lions Park shelter
I was gonna
rehab
say, you
gets.
got
So
the
we're
Lions
gonna,
Park shelter
yeah,
again.
we're
Well,
gonna.
where's the other 80,000?
Well, that's where we're gonna talk to some people. No. No, we still have some detail work to do on it. I just wanted to mainly show that we're
Right.
shifting that Lions Park into 2019. But then we'd have another park, and whether that's athletic park or whether it's another park that we want to do, we typically have 2 parks per year that we're going in to actually rehab. And then the other one to point out is the fuel system replacement. That's a big one. And there's going to be things eventually that we have to do with dealing with our fuel system up at the municipal service building. And so we want to make sure that we have dollars put in there to be ready when we have to make some moves on that. You can see the big ones in 22, Shadowwood Park rehab, and then we do have the playground replacements at Lions Park. Those really aren't in need of replacement right now, but they eventually will be. The shelter is definitely the one that needs the attention at this point, and that's why we have it in 19. And then 23, you can see McKnight Park, the playground up there, rehab on that, Hickory Street Playground rehab, and then Pioneer Park rehab. And the question came up last week about would some say they have irrigation, some say they don't. The ones that we show irrigation are ones that don't have irrigation now. And for neighborhood parks, it gets down to we typically have the worst looking property in the entire neighborhood because they're not irrigated. And really sort of the thought is, should we keep up with what the rest of the neighborhood looks like? And then the ones like Pioneer Park, those are pretty heavily utilized parks, and so to keep them irrigated to keep them playable during the year. So again, 19 ends up being a lot more solid than the rest of them, but it gives you a sense of the types of projects that we're looking at in here. And also I think important to point out that the 4 years you guys took to put the $1 million in place to do this, these things wouldn't happen but for that. And it was pretty clear in the survey that the results we looked at last week, that people in the community are very supportive about us putting dollars into things that keep the things we already have invested into in good shape. And so I think this is a direct impact of the work you guys did over the 4 years to get it to this point where we can actually start programming these things that really need to be programmed on a regular basis. And we've obviously had some catch up to do because we didn't have this before, but the more we do, the faster we'll catch up and get these things done. So for 2019, the planned expenditures, so again, the CIP program, the one that represents the new item in the budget that we had the funds to be able to support adding it this year, but we needed to deal with the permanent funding of it, is the community service officers with our code compliance division. This is one, I talked about it last time, it's the addition of 2.5 people to bring us up to a full complement of 4 people, so 1 supervisor and then 3 CSOs. This has 2 impacts. This has the impact of us providing a more consistent and reliable service to our residents, especially as our housing population ages, and we see more problem properties in the community, and how do we deal with it on a proactive basis versus a reactive basis. But the other thing it does, and this is why I think it really ties to that sustainability of services that we've talked about and retreats and things like that, is if you look at the way this service is provided now, it is about as inefficient as you can have a service provided. We have a number of our department heads, so Kevin, Tim, Brian spend a significant amount of their time out in the field, basically monitoring things on a reactive basis because we just don't have the staff in place. And so this move is not only going to improve the service level that we have within our city, but it's also going to have a pretty significant impact on making our other services more sustainable because we won't be putting, quite frankly, pretty expensive resources into providing services that don't require that expensive of a resource to do. So I think this is going to be something that's going to have a big impact not only on the residents but also on the organization itself. That represents about, I had it somewhere in here, it's about 2% increase for the new service with that, and you'll see what the tax impact is for the average resident then. We have planned dollars in for employee wages and benefits. We're currently starting that process of negotiation now, so I don't want to sort of throw out, you know, sort of what we're looking at. I think in the initial discussions we've had, I think so far we're all on the same page, and it's stuff that we've programmed and planned for in the budget, but we have not come back with any recommendations on contracts yet. So that's something that we've planned something in, and I plan on coming back to you with recommendations this fall yet on that. It fully funds our equipment acquisition to make sure we keep up with the replacement of our equipment. And then we also want to make sure that we put dollars in. The trial period for the body cameras that we have ends next summer. So if that's a program that we say, yes, we want to continue to do to make sure that we have dollars in there to be able to continue that. We also include with that replacement of our cameras in our vehicles themselves. To have both systems actually working under one system in the long run is going to be a lot more cost efficient for us to look at. And then all other...
What kind of dollars are those cameras? I don't remember we ever really talked dollars.
I don't have it on, I'll get it for you. It's something that Noel's put in a sort of placeholder, but we're actually getting actual quotes from it. So by the time we get closer into the budget, I'll have an exact number for you.
Is it just your comment in there, you know, under the CSOs, this is the only new program to address in the 2019 budget? Well, that's really not true because the body cameras are new as well.
Some of them, though, we're eliminating some expenses that we have. We're eliminating some expenses we have for existing cameras in our cars by looking at the two together. So we're not necessarily considering it new from a funding perspective. We're using existing resources that are already there, okay, and then programming up towards it. So we're not recommending any increase in the tax levy to be able to support that. And then all other items would remain unchanged. So recommendation. You know, I mentioned before from an operational standpoint, the 1.7% new market growth and the 3% inflation is a 4.7% increase. The 2.4% represents the addition of the Code Compliance Division. And this next page looks at what that impact would be. Again, our tax capacity went up 5.6%. So what it says is that with the proposed increase, the average home in 2018 was valued at $289,000. That same home in 2019 would be valued at $299,000. The taxes on the example home in 2018 would have been $831. They'd be $871 for this year. So a $40 annual increase would have a 4.8% impact on the average resident. Now, again, this is the average resident. So if somebody has
only city taxes,
and it's only city taxes, average resident. If somebody had less of an increase in their property values, their tax impact would be less. If they had more of a value increase in their property, their impact would be more. So, you know, basically what it's saying is our tax rate would go up by 1.3%. It's the difference between what our levy increase and the tax capacity increase would be. The good news is, so this chart is looking at assuming that we implemented the tax levy recommendation and comparing it to every other city, assuming they had 0% increase. We're actually one position better than last year as far as the tax levy per capita. And that's based on the increases that other cities saw last year and then also our population increase. So our tax levy per capita, $346. That makes us 82nd out of the 87 cities in the metro area that we compare to. I throw Chanhassen in there because it's a neighboring city. You can see their tax levy per capita is $427. We're the 6th lowest in the Twin Cities. Again, assuming we change and nobody else changes, which won't be the case, people will change. And then, you know, we're the lowest tax levy per capita in Carver County. The one thing we talked a little bit about last week is the one thing we've never really had an apples to apples comparison on with Chanhassen is that they've never had franchise fee. It is something, we did have a broader discussion with them last week. They did not implement their franchise fee last year, but they're looking at doing it this year. And one of the questions that came up is if they had a franchise fee, would that take away assessments on properties for street reconstruction? Because they're looking at taking their franchise fee and using it to pay for street reconstruction. The answer is no, they would actually still have assessments. They put that proposal forward last year, and people who had already been assessed were not happy. So, and so they propose on, at least the proposal that they have now would be is increase of a franchise fee, or adding a franchise fee for both electric and gas, which is the same as what we have. And then that would go towards their street reconstruction program. So again, from a schedule perspective, September 17th tonight is when we establish our preliminary tax levy. We review our enterprise fund 5 years in October. In mid-October to November, we review our annual budgets. December 3rd is when we'd have our annual truth and taxation hearing, and then December 17th would be when we'd consider adopting our final 2019 budget and our established tax levy. Again, if we set it tonight, we can always lower it, but we cannot go up. And so you guys do have a resolution in front of you that gives the exact amounts. And one thing I do want to point out is in that resolution, it has the city levy at $8,989,333. There's a city tax abatement levy. So the tax abatement levy is something we have to levy, but it's offset by the project that it's supporting, so it doesn't impact general residents. And then the thing that we're having a meeting on real quickly after this is our EDA, setting our HRA levy. So the total levy, including our EDA, is the $9,700,654. The tax impact that I showed up here was on everything. So it showed the impact of the EDA and the city tax levy. So it wasn't just looking at the city tax levy.
Thanks, Matt.
Any questions?
No, sir.
No.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And, you know, for people at home watching, we've seen these numbers before, and we've talked about them, and I know that a number of us really were hoping not to have to see an increase and keeping it very minimal, and while $40 doesn't seem a lot, for some people it may be a lot, but we're growing and we have to grow with what's happening, or we're going to run into more troubles down the road. It's just kind of these are the meetings that are on the tough side. You know, we all pay taxes too, sitting up here. We're getting the same impact, and no one wants to see any increases. But if we don't do these small steps somewhere along the line, we're going to have giant steps that's going to cost us more money. So,
well, as Matt pointed out, I think kind of a key aspect of this one is the CSO officer. You know, I mean, that's going to take a lot of creating this new department and provide an improved service really to the community. It's kind of a key aspect of it. You know,
right.
We've always been about quality services and providing services at a high level, and so this is going to allow us to continue to do that, and really in that same respect take some of the pressure off of some of the people who were performing those roles in the past.
I think when it
more
comes
efficient in their own roles where they should be.
Well, and I think when it comes to homes, I think people sort of view it as our existing assets that we have as a city is that
Right.
Just like they want the assets of the city to be good, they want their homes to be good too, and more importantly, they want their neighbors' homes to be good.
Right.
And if there's not somebody that's, you know, monitoring how we're doing that and only responding in a reactive way, I can tell you how those conversations, well, Kevin can definitely tell you how those conversations are, because you have the conversation with the person that gets, you know, that somebody calls in on, they're just like, well, me, what about that guy over there?
Right,
You know,
exactly.
it's unfair and inefficient, and it puts a heavy burden on places in our organization that over time are gonna really be impacted by that.
It's a lot of department heads, and you
Yep.
know, we're not paying them to do that. That's not
Right.
their job, it's not their role, it's
It's
not
not
what
an
they should be
efficient
doing.
way to do it.
Yeah.
But considering the population growth that we've had, we need more coverage so that our officers can be out doing other things while they're monitoring our ordinances. And plus, the cost of everything has gone up, so that's such a reasonable increase in my mind, that we're still going to provide extra staff for the CSOs. Because we have increased population, so we need them. And I'm amazed in this town what we get done for the amount that we charge here. Our taxes are still pretty low.
It's always not necessarily the increase, it's taking care of what we have. It's
Yeah.
kind of like what we've been doing all along. I mean, the CIP is we're just taking care of the investments that we have. And that goes back to like what Matt said, is that, you know, most people's biggest investment are their homes, but if their neighbors aren't taking care of it, somebody has to be there to
right.
be reactive and say, hey, you gotta get that taken care of. And so, I say,
But we have more people to provide services to, is what I was
Yep.
trying to get at, so.
I think the other thing, even though I heavily want to emphasize that the code compliance and CSO is going to be something that is a citywide, across department type of thing that, you know, we're going to have multiple departments involved in it. It is also providing an ancillary benefit of providing us a training ground for future officers too. And that's becoming a very difficult profession to, you know, we don't see as many people wanting to get into it as they did before. And so I think having, you know, the number one thing in a hiring process is eliminating the unknowns. And if somebody is already working for you and is already providing a high level of service, you know, it provides you another step to allow them to grow in the organization and take care of some of our future needs too.
it's a familiar face and somebody that knows the area.
Yep.
Yes.
Moves forward.
So,
All right, any other comments on the budget? Again, this is, we're setting a limit that it can only be this high, or we can't raise it, but through these other meetings, we could find something that we could lower it. I mean, I will just be honest, that hasn't happened, that I recall. I'm not gonna hold anything back, but it will not go up from here, but it could go down if something were to be found, but I wouldn't guarantee that, so.
I'll make a motion to adopt resolution 2018-125.
Second.
All right, so I have a motion by Rose, second by Schultz to approve resolution 2018-125, again, establishing a preliminary city tax levy for taxes payable 2019. Discussion. Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Ooh, that was